I was doing a little digging this weekend to answer for myself the question of whether it is gold and silver that is cheap or if it is Western labor that is overvalued. I figured the best way to explore the question is to take away all of the advantages that we, the United States, currently have on the world stage. To go back to the 1800s, when we were a fledgling country that had only a solid work ethic to rely upon. I found this reference from the National Bureau of Economic Research, which helped me solve the puzzle. Chris Duane has made the claim that historically a person has earned 1 silver dime a day for his or her labor. I haven't seen any concrete historical data to support that assertion, but here is a table that gives us some data to go by. It shows farm wages in the 1800s. The lowest wages from 1830 to 1860 were $6 per month. This is $72 per year, or about 2 to 3 silver dimes per day. Not too far away from Chris's number, but we have to also take into consideration that farmhands were also paid in food and lodging, which is not considered in the salary information. So the total compensation of a farm laborer was actually considerably higher than the 1 dime per day number. Now here's a little more relevant table for our analysis. Let's take a look only at the data prior to 1860. The reason for this is that the outbreak of the U.S. Civil War and the subsequent demonetization of silver would skew the analysis. In the earlier data, we see that the average salary of a textile mill worker was $150 per year, or about 5 silver dimes per day. These workers did not receive food and board, and so the 5 dime per day number is much closer to a true salary. So with that in mind, let's draw a comparison. If the average factory worker in the U.S. in the 19th century earned $150 per year, that would work out to 107 ounces of silver per year, or 0.35 ounces of silver per day. Factory workers in the U.S. today typically earn between $20,000 to $30,000 per year, which at today's prices is the equivalent of 930 to 1,400 ounces of silver per year. But in less developed countries like China, we see factory wages that are only sufficient to buy 150 ounces of silver per year, which is much closer to what factory workers were earning in the U.S. a couple of centuries ago, but still higher. In extreme cases like Myanmar, we can see that the average factory worker earns the equivalent of only 70 ounces of silver per year. So what changed fundamentally in the U.S.? Why can we buy so much more silver for our labor than we could 2 centuries ago? Why can we buy so much more silver than the rest of the world? Well, let's think about it a little. What dictates how much a person can produce with his or her labor? It really comes down to the advantages that the person has. If you have the right tools, you can produce much more with the same amount of effort as if you have not had any tools, right? So a person who has access to some simple machines can produce moderate output. For example, the textile worker in the 19th century had access to some simple machines and so was able to produce for his or her labor a considerable amount of fabric as a result of a given amount of effort. Fast forward to the US today, and people have access to much more sophisticated tools. Plus, we have access to enormous quantities of energy. Put those two together, and each person is capable of producing much more wealth from his or her labor than the textile worker could 2 centuries ago. So if we accept that a person's output is affected by the available stock of machinery plus available energy, we can do a little manipulation and draw some useful conclusions. Now the relationships are much more complicated than what I'm showing here, but conceptually, they'll be right. I'm just trying to make the relationships easy to visualize. Now I'm taking a lot of liberties here to keep things simple, so I hope the strict mathematicians and economists out there will forgive me for oversimplifying things. But taking the relationship and rearranging things a little, we find that the output per unit of labor is proportional to the ratio of available machinery and energy for each available unit of labor. Intuitively, this makes sense. After all, the more machinery and energy a person has, the more he or she should be able to produce. But really, what is the right-hand side of this relationship? It is the amount of value that a person can generate for each unit of labor. Economists call this productivity, but it is also directly related to the standard of living and the buying power of a person's salary. After all, the more goods and services a society can produce for their labor, the more they'll be able to consume. which means that the more machinery and energy a society has, the higher their buying power will be, and the higher their standard of living will be. So let's go back to the question of what's changed in the US that has allowed us to buy so much more silver for our salaries. Is it really the price of silver that has gone down? Hardly. According to the data, the US has available to it more energy per person than any other country in the world, and certainly much more than we had 2 centuries ago. In addition, we have a very well-developed manufacturing base, so each person is capable of producing quite a bit of value. China, although they consume more energy than we do overall, consumes about 1/4 the energy that we do when we look at things on a per capita basis. In addition, they have much less mature manufacturing base. Thus, each person on average can produce much less than we can in the US. At least that's the case at present. But things are changing. Notice that our energy consumption trend is sloping downward, while China's is sloping upward. Also, we know that China is industrializing while our industry is going into decline. Still, when we compare our present-day state to present-day China, we can see why our salaries currently can buy much more silver than China's salaries can. Take Myanmar as an extreme case. They are among the lowest energy consumers on the planet. In addition, they have almost no plant and no equipment. This is why the society has such a low standard of living. While these are very inexact relationships, it does explain why silver is so cheap in current-day US and was much more expensive 2 centuries ago, and is much more expensive to other cultures. But where are we heading? If the trends continue, then silver will become cheaper in China as it becomes much more expensive in the US. But it won't be the value of silver that changes. It will be the value of our labor. As a nation, standard of living rises, gold and silver become cheaper. When it declines, they become more expensive, along with everything else. So in conclusion, I think the US labor is worth so much currently in silver terms because of the very high availability of energy, which is largely due to the petrodollar. We also have one of the most advanced industrial bases in the world. More energy plus more manufacturing makes everything, including gold and silver, cheaper. But our power on the world stage is waning. We're losing our petrodollar status and with it the command over the world's energy stores. We're also offshoring our manufacturing base to countries like China. All of this is making gold and silver more expensive in the US and cheaper in China. This is why the metals are flowing from the west to the east. And that tells us how to invest. If you are in a country with a growing manufacturing base and a growing energy consumption, you should be investing in growth so as to take advantage of future productivity. If you are in a declining country with a declining standard of living, you should be investing in metals in an attempt to preserve the value of your past labor. With that in mind, if you are a person living in the US and want to preserve your standard of living, you'll need to save a lot of silver. Without a job, you'll need a little over $1,000 per year to continue to enjoy the current average standard of living. If you want to enjoy the standard of living of the present-day Chinese worker, then you'll only need 150 ounces per year. If you want the same standard of living as a 19th century textile worker, you'll only need 107 ounces per year. If you want to enjoy the same standard of living as someone in Myanmar, you'll need about 70 ounces per year. Save accordingly.